The Greek word for mercy, as used in this case, is the Greek word eleos, E-L-E-O-S. This story brings to closure several things for us. First, whenever we experience splanchnon, compassion, that positive inner response to someone in need, and we follow through with eleos, mercy, the necessary and right actions to meet the need, we are in fact loving and being righteous at the same time. In our righteousness, we are loving God and a stranger or an enemy or a neighbor. Second, the point of the story was to define neighbor. And, as we are told, that was the one who showed mercy, that is, the Samaritan, the one who loved a stranger and did what was necessary and right for him. This suggests that the great commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves means to meet the needs of those who meet the needs of others, even as we meet the needs of others and ourselves every day. Let me explain this in other words. If loving God is doing His commandments, and if doing His commandments includes meeting the needs of others, whether brothers, foreigners, or enemies, this is the first and greatest commandment. The second commandment, to love our neighbor, therefore means that we are to meet the needs or give support to our neighbor, whether brother, foreigner, or enemy, who is defined by Jesus as one who does the first commandment, that is, meeting the needs of others, brothers, foreigners, or enemies. And we are to meet the needs or give support to our neighbor even as we meet the needs or give support to ourselves. Third, even a stranger or an enemy can show love to one in need. It was not the dying man's brother, the priest or Levite, who met his needs. It was a Samaritan. And finally, the first and greatest commandment, to love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, can only mean that we must meet the needs of God. And the needs of God are for us to be good citizens of His kingdom by doing what He has commanded us to do, to obey His laws and commandments. To conclude this study of the word splanchnon, we have shown that this is a positive inner response to someone in need, which may either be shut off or acted upon by eleos, mercy, doing what is necessary and right to meet the needs of the person in need of help. When compassion is expressed in mercy, we are engaged in an act of love and being righteous, that is, doing right acts. When compassion is shut off, then biblical love does not happen, and the love of God does not remain in that person. Back to the death of Judas, it is clear from the account in Matthew that Judas was aware of what he had done. Let's relook at Matthew 27, verses 3 and 4 in the RSV. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that he, Jesus, was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned in betraying innocent blood. They said, What is that to us? See to it yourself. Judas now recognized the great need of Jesus. He was condemned to death. And according to my interpretation of he repented and said, I have sinned in betraying innocent blood, he felt the compassion, the splanchnon we have been discussing, a positive inner response to someone in need. He tried to show mercy, eleos, doing what was necessary and right to meet that need by returning the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. By doing this, he hoped, I'm sure beyond hope, to reverse the consequences of his actions. But they would have none of that. The money was blood money, as was indicated in the next verses of Matthew. And throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money." So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore that field had been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, "And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me." Therefore, because of the circumstances, there was no way in which Judas could help Jesus. He could not follow through with the mercy, or eleos, doing what was necessary and right to meet the need. He was helpless. He could not undo what he had done. Therefore, falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and all his bowels gushed out. My interpretation of this statement, based on all of the information we have discussed, is this. Upon realization that he could not right the wrong he had done, he fell prostrate to the ground. I would take that in a literal sense. His heart was broken. That's a figurative translation of he burst open in the middle. And his compassion poured out of him, taking the word bowels figuratively and not literally. Rather than shutting off his compassion from Jesus, his compassion could not be fulfilled by eleos, or mercy, and therefore his splanchnon, his compassion, poured out of him. The picture described is that Judas fell to the ground and sobbing cried out that he could not help Jesus. And that's my interpretation of that Acts 1:18 section. There's also a seeming contradiction in the two accounts about the place where Judas was buried. Acts seems to say that Judas bought the land with the 30 pieces of silver, whereas Matthew says the chief priests and elders bought the land with the 30 pieces of silver. A reconciliation of this contradiction can be made by a proper translation of the account in Acts. Rather than, "This man purchased a field with the reward of iniquity," the translation should be, "gained a place of punishment for his unrighteousness," that is, not doing what is right. Therefore, Judas did not buy, but gained a final resting place not suitable for a Jew of the first century as payment for his wrongdoing. The place bought by the chief priests and elders was called the potter's field for the purpose of burying strangers in. A stranger was a foreigner. The place was called the field of blood. We can put these two accounts of the death of Judas together. Let me attempt that by giving the translation from Matthew and inserting the account from Acts in accordance with my own interpretation of those words. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that he was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. See, and in mind, if I may give a footnote here in my interpretation, it says, "And when he saw that he was condemned," this is the place where splanchnon takes place. He was moved by compassion. And it says he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. That was his response to that compassion with mercy, with Elios, saying, I have sinned in betraying innocent blood. But they said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. So he was thwarted in his attempt of following through from his compassion. And throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he gained a place of punishment for his unrighteousness. And falling to the ground, his heart was broken, and all of his compassion left him. He departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priest, taking the pieces of silver, said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money. So they took counsel, and bought with them a potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore the field had been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. So we start out with a question, how did Judas die? Very simply, he committed suicide by hanging himself. But the story is much more involved than that, as we have discussed. I can say that the meaning of love and righteousness is having compassion on those who have needs and showing them mercy by helping them with the necessary and right things to meet their needs. These actions, in turn, are ends in themselves and not means to an end. They represent the commandments of God. Thank you very much for listening.